had a bully? Not the one who gives you a speech before punching you. I mean, the real kind. The one you avoided in the hallways, the one you left class early to avoid, the one you hated quietly, the one who didn't even seem angry, just entitled. You didn't argue with them, you didn't negotiate with them, you just tried to survive having to deal with these people. Yeah. Anybody ever had a bully like that? Y'all ever had a bully like that? That's a bully. Now, before anyone gets sensitive, no, I'm not talking about my older sister. Although, who doesn't have childhood trauma growing up being black in America, right? But I digress. I'm talking about a bully. Bullies. You know, because on a global stage, the United States, America, is the bully. And bullies don't start with conversations. They start by making an example of somebody. Which brings me to Venezuela. As you all know, over the last 48 hours in this country, our president and our military have moved in Venezuela. Not only did we commit airstrikes in Venezuela, but we've also taken into custody, some might say kidnapped, the president of the country and his wife in an attempt, according to us, to have a regime change. Now, let's be clear. Nicolas Maduro has kind of a mixed review in Venezuela amongst the Venezuelan people. Some people support him fully, and others oppose him fully. Depends on where you were or in the situation under his dictatorship. But that's not the point, and that's not what the intention of this discussion is. The point is, for me, and for a lot of people, is it even legal for another country like the United States to storm into someone's country and kidnap a sitting president? Because kidnapping a president isn't diplomacy. It's dominance, bullying. And under Trump, as we've already seen in the last year, under Donald Trump, legality is even negotiable. That seems to be the real art of the deal, right? Then there's Greenland. And Trump said this.
Ukraine, and we'll worry about Greenland in about 2 months. Let's talk about Greenland in 20 days.
And of course, the United Nations and Denmark, who actually have a legal claim to Greenland, they said this.
For det første, så mener jeg, at man skal tage den amerikanske præsident alvorligt, når han siger, at han ønsker
Basically,
Grønland.
that's their version of saying, sir, absolutely not. But Trump has been insistent on Greenland, having Greenland, which he is basically treating international diplomacy like a real estate transaction. At this point, you know, we don't know what's going on. Trump is literally playing spades with nations. He is becoming less and less the commander-in-chief and becoming more and more the developer-in-chief. No partners, no trade manners, no table manners, just cutting cards and declaring that he runs the game. Like it's Monopoly or something. That is not foreign policy at all. That is imperialism with branding. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. People are wondering, how could America stoop so low? Newsflash, this is America. For centuries, part of America's diplomacy has been about imperialism. Now, of course, those of us who know American history, we know that America's founding was to escape from authoritarianism from an imperialistic nation, i.e., the British. After being a set of English colonies who for a long time, through salutary neglect, governed ourselves. Well, we decided to fight a war, the War of Independence, and the outcome of that war was an independence from imperialism. So for many years, it was in question whether or not the United States was going to be your traditional imperialistic nation. However, money speaks. And it speaks loudly. And since the Monroe Doctrine in 1821, we have been engaging in imperialism in some capacity. Cultural imperialism. I mean, American media literally dominates. You can literally be in the middle of South Africa, as I was watching yesterday on the internet, on the World Wide Web, and there are plans to put a Walmart in South Africa. As if Walmart isn't doing enough damage here. Let's take it to South Africa. They need those brand new low budget shoes. They need those cheap, inexpensive, farm raised shrimp. Hey, look, I'm not mad at Walmart. However, this imperialistic tendency of the United States has always gotten us into, let's just say, 9/11. You know, this isn't the first time we've engaged. I mean, there's Libya, there's Guatemala, there's Cuba, there's Haiti multiple times, there's Iraq and Iran, several times in Latin America. Hell, we got the Panama Canal by invading Panama. I can go on and on. The Philippines, Hawaii when it actually was a nation, Guam, Puerto Rico, who we still refuse to give statehood, but we still maintain control over. So the United States is not new to imperialism, even though we kind of distance ourselves from the traditional imperialistic stuff that we see all over the world, dating way back to like the 1600s. So this is branding. This is what we are. Trump wants to put Trump's name on Greenland. And the dangerous part, everyone knows this is. The power is betting no one will stop it. Just is what it is. Just what we're going to be doing. To me, that's bully logic. America's a bully. We've been a bully. We continue to be a bully. And depends on who's in office at any given time. We're more of a bully than we are in previous times. It is what it is. And that's my black truth. All right, so now let's talk about some black news. It's time for Black News Now. So in this segment, this is where we deal with news that affects the black community, black life here, and we eventually get into across the world, and we deal with it truthfully and honestly. No trauma porn, no respectability sermons, just context, clarity, and of course, truth. Well, there's a story coming out of the church, again, the black church, but this time it's more serious of a situation. Pastor Donnie McClurkin, you all know Pastor Donnie McClurkin, we fall down, but we get up. We fall down, but we get up. for a saint. Y'all don't hear me. Am I preaching? A saint is just a sinner who fell down and got his ass back up. That is Pastor Donnie McClurkin, and amen. That's a word. That is a word. Well, Pastor Donnie McClurkin has been accused of assault. And I ain't talking about one grope, two grope, three gropes. There are multiple gropes and some sexual violations. There are assault allegations involving the gospel singer. And it's very important to realize that allegations aren't convictions, but it does require us to talk about this, of course. So Pastor Donnie McClurkin had an assistant, a young man, who he invited to come to his ministry. Now, this particular ministry was called the Open Walls Ministry. No pun intended. And at this Open Walls Ministry, this is where men who are gay, homosexual, queer, come to try to reform themselves, or intending to reform themselves and parade the gay away. Now, as much as I have my own personal opinions on praying the gay away, and as many times as I stood and got on my own respective knees, praying, it only led me to getting on my respective knees doing other things, and we're not going to talk about that. But, point is, I don't have I don't want to go into my full opinion on that. However, at these meetings, the accuser was actually assaulted and violated, went to Pastor Donnie about it, and Pastor Donnie fired the perpetrator. However, as time went on and as he got closer to Pastor Donnie began to violate him by groping on him before shows. And there was even a situation in the court documents in which the accuser said that he was crying from just having been violated by Pastor Donnie. And Pastor Donnie simply said, oh, he's catching the spirit. Do you not feel the spirit that he's catching? He's so full of the spirit, he's crying. That's interesting. Nevertheless, it went further. Things started to happen. Body parts were shown to the accuser, alleged to Pastor Donnie McClurkin. And we even have a message sent to the accuser from Pastor Donnie apologizing for the behavior, which I'm no legal expert. I'm just a simple historian, talk show host. But that seems like evidence. Real good evidence. Nevertheless, it is what it is. So, we have that. And that's very interesting. Whatever the case may be, like I said, these are just allegations. And in these allegations, we don't want to draw any conclusions or come to any of our own personal beliefs or our own personal spins on it. But I'd say this, accountability still matters. And from what I know, based on knowing about Pastor Donnie McClurkin over the years, he's really been struggling with his sexual orientation, and really been struggling with maintaining that he should not express, live, and be in his truth. Similarly to Catholic priests. And similarly to Catholic priests, you fill in the blanks. Nevertheless, that's the story. That's what's happening. And we'll see how that comes in the future and the outcome of this situation with Pastor Donnie McClurkin. Because we fall down, we get up. That's all I got to say about that. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit, just real quick. But I also want to make sure this is heard as well, too, because, you know, we're talking about this, but for decades, you know, black institutions, especially black church, have suffered and struggled with power and protection, okay? We know that things happen all the time in the church, and as opposed to going to authorities, many times it gets kept and dealt with or not dealt with in the church. I have my own stories. This isn't cancel culture. This is about accountability. So we'll call this accountability culture. We can care about victims and due process. Okay? We can honor legacy without granting immunity. We can tell the truth without tearing ourselves apart. That's just simple maturity and accountability. And I think the courts are going to handle it. But the court of public opinion is going to also weigh in. And I believe, my own personal, this is me, I believe that if the church allows people to show up and allow salvation, condemnation, damnation, whatever, be between God and that particular person, and not be so rabidly anti this person and that person and this life and this choice and that choice, the church would be a softer place for people to land. But it's also a choice. All right, let's move to the next story. Did y'all know? Of course y'all knew. Today marks the 5th, count it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years anniversary of January 6th. And that seems like it was so long ago. Do you recall being in America during the pandemic? Do you recall being in America during the Black Lives Matter protest and the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and all of these situations that came up? It was quite a moment, wasn't it? But we remember it. And we remember J6 very quick. But in case you don't, here's a little reminder of what happened. What had happened.
We need to hold the doors of the Capitol.
So let's be clear.
I need
5 years ago, it's been 5 years since a violent mob stormed the Capitol building trying to overthrow our democracy and a fair election. What matters the most isn't at this point what happened, because we know the outcome of what happened. There was over 100 something men protecting, guarding the Capitol guards. They were assaulted and harmed. One died from this situation. A young lady participating, Ashley Babbitt, in this situation lost her life. People were traumatized. The situation was just crazy. And over 1,000 people were convicted and arrested and convicted. Due process, trial and jury over this situation. And as soon as Donald Trump got into office, within a matter of a month or so, he was pardoning all 1,000 of those people who participated in that, what some might call, insurrection. Right? What happened isn't important anymore. But how it is remembered is possibly more important than what actually occurred. When Black people protest injustice during the George Floyd situation and march through the streets, and even if you go back when Black people protest injustices back during the Civil Rights era, during the Rodney King situation, it was called lawlessness. Criminals, looting and stealing and robbing. When white extremists attack democracy, it's called protest that just simply went too far. And we know that this double standard happens to exist in the media. Same country, but different rules. January 6th exposed, very loudly, I might add, how flexible law and order becomes depending on who is involved. History doesn't repeat itself. It just rebrands. And actually, the more interesting part of it all is this idea that it was allowed to happen, and we're kind of almost not supposed to talk about it, calling it what it was. Lawlessness. Calling it what it was. Looting. Calling it what it was. A fucking terrorist attack. Homegrown American terrorist. And I'm going to say this plainly. Got to take these off to say that. Donald Trump is responsible for it. In fact, just this week, we released the testimony of Special Prosecutor Jack Smith, who worked on the case, and verbatimly, he said Donald Trump caused the January 6th insurrection. But laws have always operated differently for some than it does for others in the United States. Let's switch to some global headlines. Well, we're seeing all over the world a backlash, some celebration of Donald Trump's administration and using the military to take control of Venezuela. And Donald Trump himself have even said that the United States will hold on to Venezuela and control their government for a while. But we're getting mixed things in his administration. Some say yes, some say no. He says we're going to control Venezuela. And Marco Rubio, his Secretary of State, said, maybe not so much. So we don't know. It's per typical of this administration all over the fucking place. But there are several things happening. One, Donald Trump has been watching Cuba, and he has been saying things that would suggest he's potentially thinking about going into Cuba and taking over Cuba, or at least taking the leader in Cuba. He's also mentioned Colombia in a similar situation. And so now Cuba is watching the United States, and when the United States intervenes in one country, neighboring nations actually prepare for instability in their own countries. They've lived this before. They've seen the United States in this place before. And so Cubans are on guard whether or not the United States is going to intervene once again in their country and create a situation. And this president, I recall seeing news coverage of people like Stephen Miller, who's his defense advisor, one of his advisors, I think. No, his senior advisor. I apologize. And he said things like the Trump doctrine, and has equated to like the Monroe Doctrine of going into our hemisphere, doing what's in the best interest for our country. And it's an interesting conversation. But other nations are also, black nations are having it. I use Cuba because they're black Cubans, obviously, and I'm sure they have their own perspective of it. But also, other nations are speaking out. South Africa has actually issued a warning against the United States bullying behavior, right? Ramaphosa, some of the others have said that the United States have done too much and they are bullying smaller nations around them. And if they are allowed, we, the United States, are allowed to just do this, what prevents us from going elsewhere in other places and doing the same thing? And Uganda followed suit as well. Uganda actually formally petitioned the United Nations to sanction or to speak out or to do something against the United States for the actions of the Trump administration. So what we see happening is the global South is naming a pattern out loud. And this isn't a pattern that they've never seen. Africa knows colonialism. Africa knows imperialism. Cuba specifically knows American imperialism. You can go back to the Spanish-American War, in which After the war was completed, it was America's shortest war. After the war in 1898 was over, America took possession for a while of Cuba. And Cuba didn't get its liberation till a little bit later on. So they've seen this pattern. Other nations have seen patterns of imperialism, and they see America acting as an imperialistic bully, according to them. And once the pattern is named, for them it loses power. But we should see where this goes on a global scale. So let's talk culture. Culture. The people. Y'all know I watch a lot of TV. And a lot of internet TV, a lot of streaming, but I watch a lot of TV. I watch some shows, and one of my favorite shows since its inception has been Married to Medicine. One of the things I love about Married to Medicine is that it's Black excellence, it's Black achievement, it's Black Atlanta power on full display. It's one of my favorite shows because it shows us more than just being rappers or gangsters or athletes and or impoverished, right? These are doctors and doctors' wives and husbands on these shows. And so they show us perspective of the Black community that few people actually get a chance to see daily, and a lot of people actually believe exist. A lot of people actually believe it doesn't exist. So it's good to have that in our faces as often as possible. And one of the things that make Married to Medicine distinct from like The Housewives, which I also love, is that it's not centered on the drama. It's centered on family life, Black professionalism, and how they manage. You know, it's a little different. But the thing about Black excellence isn't perfection. It's accountability. It's therapy. It's evolution. And seeing Black excellence on television actually does matter. But in that episode, in Sunday's episode that just passed, it was a scene that I thought was interesting to talk about. Dr. Simone Whitmore is a gynecologist in the Atlanta area. She's one of the main cast members on the show. And she's married to Cecil Whitmore, who is an entrepreneur, real estate agent, he owns his own real estate team and all brokerage, I think, and all these other things. And they were having a conversation with their children. And their children are children who were born into privilege. Black children born into privilege. These are Black children not born in the hood, not born in the ghettos and the projects, as many people assume we are. But these are Black children born into privilege. The next generation of Blackness. And Cecil and Simone were not. They worked their way into where they needed to be and to get the money that they needed to have and continue to build wealth through real estate, through her businesses, through her practice, and so forth. Well, the son, their youngest son, believes that it is their parents' responsibility to continue to take care of them and make sure that their lives as their children born into this privilege are easier than the lives that their parents had. He even said, if I recall from last week's episode, he even said that white parents don't put their children through these same challenges, to have it difficult for them to experience life. And so this past Sunday, kind of Cecil mirrored that conversation with his brother. They were having a very engaging conversation. And he basically said, I waited in the line at Morehouse for financial aid. I did what I had to do to survive, and I don't want my kids to have to do that. Isn't that the point of gaining wealth and doing better? Why we as Black people always have to pass struggle to teach the lesson of struggle to each generation? When will we stop doing that? When will we just be able to achieve and to give our kids the achievement so they can achieve, and so forth? Now, this conversation has been having a wedge on his marriage. His wife, Simone, Dr. Simone, is contemplating divorce because she feels like she works so hard and it goes underappreciated. She works so hard and it's her son and her husband against her, and it almost feels like she's using her money and her money's being used and no one's taking into consideration how hard it is that she works to achieve the things that they have. Was a very interesting conversation on multi-dynamics for me. One of the multi-dynamic parts of it was the power dynamic shift in black marriages. I think it's pretty common knowledge that black women have advanced more educationally, more economically than black men. And there's a lot of reasons behind that. You can go through social media, and they have this gender war of black men and black women going back and forth, kind of in this power tug-of-war battle that they have online. But black women have done a lot, have accomplished quite a bit. And there's a level of black men who are underprepared for that. Now, I'm not saying that that's Cecil. Cecil seems to be very entrepreneurial, very malleable in finding something to do, trying to maintain the lifestyle along with his wife. However, her money mostly, obviously, brings more money to the family. And so that power dynamic is touched. But then on top of that, you have the other conversation, which I think Cecil's brother gave him some really good advice on that. You have a good woman, listen to her, right? But as a man, that's kind of hard for, I guess, Cecil to have to listen to his wife about and let her lead in some aspects, especially if it's her money. Mostly, that's footing the bills. But Cecil's conversation was also interesting, I think, and enlightening and worth a discussion. When do we stop the struggle conversation? Now, I'm a person who believes in knowing our history. Obviously, being a historian, I believe it is important for us to value those stories, value that information. I believe black people to be the most powerful people, a group of the most powerful people on the planet. Our story is powerful. Our global black story is powerful. But black Americans having to overcome one of the worst existences in human history to where we are, even though we got ways to go, where we are compared to where we were just 200, 300 years ago is a long way. And there are some who are saying we should move beyond just having to struggle. And I think that that's an important conversation to have.